Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Creative Nomad. I am so excited today because I have Harris Eddie Hill, and now they're doing some amazing things out there. And what really hit me, what really was right there in my face, was all the things that they come over, that they've gotten over. No, Harris has survived and overcome trauma, unaccepting family members, cancer, abusive relationships, physical paralysis, mental health challenges, and yet they have found their way to be emotional freedom and is now passing that power forward. And that's all what this show is all about. Just giving you some inspirational stories to know that you're not alone. So, without further ado, here's Gunby Harris.
Welcome to the Creative Nomad Show, your go-to place for all you awesome creators out there who are itching for more than the everyday grind. Here's your host, JB.
Welcome back, everyone. And Harris, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited for our conversation today, Jeff. It's a real pleasure.
It is. It's a pleasure for me. You are doing some amazing things out there. Do me a favor, really introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name's Harris. I use they, them pronouns. I'm non-binary. I'm a podcaster. I've been podcasting for years. And I'm a best-selling author. And I founded the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing this year. And really been getting going with that, especially after seeing what a gap there is in the healthcare system. And seeing how survivors and hopefully thrivers like me are really undercatered for in the medical system. So I really wanted to bring healing to a lot of folks who otherwise have no other options when it comes to complex trauma, and also educate them so that they've got enough information to kind of be empowered around their own healing, their own decisions, and to know exactly what they're looking for, exactly how it should work. Broad strokes, obviously, so that, and also to give them hope that there is life after trauma, to the point where you can talk about it as much as I do and it doesn't get to you. It's not difficult anymore. People say like, oh, it must take you a lot of bravery to talk about it, but it doesn't. That's the beauty of really getting over trauma and having it treated successfully.
Yeah, there's a power in, and I'm sorry, I'm getting echo for me. So every time I talk, if I'm talking a little weird, just know it's because my echo in my head. So, but that's the thing about trauma. Once you heal it, it no longer has that control over you. And that's really the reason to heal your traumas. They fester. What has been one of the greatest benefits for you healing your trauma?
I think it's just allowed me to have some, like, the best relationships of my life. I'm not talking about romantically necessarily, but the friends that I have around me, the family that I have grown stronger relationships with since, um, being able to be in difficult situations and manage them much better. I think just in general, I feel like a more effective human being, and I'm more capable of feeling joy and of enjoying secure, healthy relationships with other people who, they're still imperfect like me, but we're all committed to being mature and taking accountability for ourselves. And it's so nice. I think before, the relationships, most, not all of them, but most of the relationships I had before, even friendships, they weren't healthy because I had been brought up in such a way that I didn't really know what a super healthy relationship or friendship looked like. And as a result, I was part of that equation, and it wasn't my fault. Like how we're brought up and how we're treated as children isn't our fault. But there was definitely it was empowering and humbling to say, well, actually, me as an adult, I'm playing a part in this. And if I want my reality with my relationships to change, I need to be willing to change. And it wasn't through self-blame, and it took a lot of self-compassion. And I look back now at the version of myself that was doing the best they could with the people that were in front of them, knowing nothing else. And I have such compassion and love for that earlier version. There's no blame, there's no judgment. It's just, I did my best with what I had at the time. And now, knowing all of that and understanding how to move forward, it's meant that I'm now finally able to enjoy my life, and I really want that for other people.
Do you find that people confuse responsibility and blame all the time?
Yes, yes. I think it's really hard because there was definitely, I definitely know that there was a point in my own journey where, when if someone had suggested that I was playing a part in it, unknowingly or unwittingly, I would have been really angry. So I really hear that. And I guess you're not ready to hear that until you're ready to hear that. And I think there's such a, I know that for me, I went through this quite a long phase of being quite angry at other people and how they treated me. And it's not that I ever changed my mind, like, oh, it wasn't a big deal that they were awful to me. That's still true. It's still true. It's just that in order, I had to get to a point where I would let go of the the horse that I was flogging, of like, they've done something wrong, and turn it into this real deep and difficult acceptance that, for as long as I'm alive, at least, there will be abusive and toxic folks out there. And the best thing I can do for myself is to get out of that cycle. That's all I can do.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, when I came out, one of the things that I noticed about myself is one of the things that I've changed about my relationships. Give me 1 second. I do have dogs. They are here. There's nowhere to put them. So, um, that will happen. The mailman decided to come here. So I apologize. When I was coming out, one of the things that I found myself doing was, like, basically being rainbows and glitter all the time, right? And pushing, I'm gay, I'm gay, I'm gay, I'm gay. I'm Jeff, I'm gay. I'm Jeff, I'm gay. I'm fabulous. Like, la 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 la. Right. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that it doesn't have to be the first thing about me. And typically, my relationships go better now because I'm not trying to force anything. Not that I do promenade games, or I wouldn't hold hands, or I wouldn't be out, right? I'm out, but it's not my first thing. Have you noticed that as you're getting older, that's something that's true for you, or is that something that is the factor? And it's different because you are non-binary, and it's a little different.
Yeah, I think whilst I was in my, still very much my traumatized phase, complex trauma, so much of your safety as a complex trauma survivor is tied to what other people think and how they feel and how they treat you. But don't worry, I'm not going to go all toxic positivity. I think there's a balance. And, so it was more, I think at that point, I think I was scared of rocking the boat, of saying too much, of advocating for myself, and the times that people kind of did show their true colors and were maybe unkind or exclusionary or dismissive, or any of those, like, not so nice things. I found that really heartbreaking. And now I'm not impervious to it by any stretch. I think that, you can be the most well-adjusted person in the world, and if you're living in a society that still marginalizes you, I don't think there's any mindset in the world that can completely overcome that or completely mitigate the impact of that. But I would say that the energy I come at that from now is much more of it's much more of like I'm just exhausted by the whole thing rather than triggered. So, and I'm saying triggered in a really genuine way. I really used to feel very, unsafe, and I would be very upset. And now I just, I still feel it. It still hurts, but it's just coming from a place of like, well, it's not my fault, and I don't have to argue my case here. The people who care about other human beings unconditionally are on my side. It's okay. And then there's those people who really feel the way they feel about people like me, and actually that's not going to change. And just because they feel that way, it doesn't mean that my worth is any less.
Yes, I totally get that. And it's crazy because I just had this happen, right? My dad, I'm turning off my notifications. I just realized everything just went crazy. Of course, anytime I'm talking, something goes off. Um, so my dad recently, I've just published a book. You can check it on Amazon. So
Congrats.
the new book came in, and I was really kind of excited, right? I got my physical copy, that moment, and I opened it up, and it was inside with my dad, and he took it, he looked at it, he handed it back to me. He didn't say a word, didn't do a gesture, didn't like acknowledge that he was holding a book that I wrote. And for weeks, I was so triggered. Every time I thought about it, I was just triggered. Like, I can't believe you just handed it back to me. And so finally, I'm like, Dad, I can't let this go. He goes, I didn't say great job. Like, no, you said nothing. Like, nothing at all.
Yeah.
And he was like, I thought I said great job. And that was it. Right. But I spent weeks angry at my father because I couldn't tell him that I was triggered. And we've had conversations about being gay. We've had conversations about, all these things. And he's on his last days. He's in hospice. So every conversation is significant. It feels significant, right? So where's that happen in your life? Like, where have you had to like just say, look, this is how you're making me feel, and either got a positive or like, hey, yeah, you're, whatever.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that the most with people of sort of similar age to me, or sort of within my sort of sibling and friendship bracket. I think those are the people that I feel the most safe to have those conversations with. And I'm still learning and growing. I'm still advocating for myself with people I feel less secure with, or I don't know as well, or I'm not as close to. Um, And I think, I'm also autistic and ADHD. So I spent a huge amount of my childhood being ostracized for reasons I didn't understand. And, my early sort of career, or at least being employed, of people constantly being upset by things that I said. So, and I don't think it was those genuine incidents were never, I was never being unkind. I just didn't understand the social rules. So, I think once I became self-aware and I started to learn that, the way I was communicating wasn't wrong, but just that other people were having an emotional experience of those conversations. And this, I get this now intuitively, but at the time I didn't. I wasn't connected to my intuition or anything else, so I was flying blind. And so I spent a really long time learning about when you say things, um, prepare for, and I don't feel obligated. I think it's been like really interesting to me to learn how to communicate in a way that makes people feel really held, and um either that I make them laugh or I bring in my own vulnerability if I'm inviting them to be vulnerable, or that it's a vulnerable conversation. um so overall it's been a really positive thing. And there are still some people in my life who are not on the same page as me. I had a very similar experience, as you did with your dad, where I have a certain family member who has never acknowledged that I've been published, and twice at this point. And I wasn't triggered. I think I'm lucky enough that I've got to a point where I see it happen. I'm still annoyed, but I'm not triggered, and it's different. And I'm still annoyed, and I'm like, how the bloody hell is he doing this? And I'm like, this is madness. Like, why? Like, how can you witness, sort of like someone you purport to love unconditionally, see them like do this work that's like influencing the world, and you've put your heart and soul into it, and they don't say anything? Like, that to me is madness. Um, but there are some people for whom they're not ready to have that conversation. Um, and I suspect largely will never be, unless their ego is stripped down, sort of in their final times, if their ending is happens for them in that way. I think it's for some people who are traumatized and the only way they made it out was with ego and not too much empathy. um they need that ego and that lack of empathy to survive whatever it is that's gone on for them. And I've witnessed it before, where that wall tends to come down at the end of life. I've witnessed, and done end of life many times with other people. I think I've been to about 50 funerals at this point. So I'm pretty practiced. I've seen it a lot. I've seen it enough to recognize the patterns and the phases that people go through. And yeah, I think getting to a point where I like it, it's so amazing that you've been able to have that conversation with your dad, and that he's open to it, and he's like, oh, okay, because I try and think about having those or I've given up, I suppose, but having that sort of conversation with the people in my life who are not there yet, it would go poorly, I think, and
And
historically has.
you know what? My relationship with my family wasn't always this. So for many years, I couldn't talk about having a boyfriend or being gay, or and even with my dad, it's not my first conversation, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
not that he loved my ex. He thought when I told him that my ex and I were going to get married, uh, he said, "You guys aren't already married?" And I'm like, "No." He goes, "Oh, well, great. He's a great guy." We probably had like this beautiful, um, yeah, just this beautiful thing, that conversation back then. And I tried not to talk to him for like 6 months because I'm like, I don't want to have another conversation with you because that conversation was so beautiful. If it ends here, we're good. Like, we're good. That was like 10 years ago. So, but I was disowned for about 3 months. I did a drag show, and because a friend was producing it, not because I'm a drag queen, not because, you know, and really good friend was producing the show. I wasn't allowed to be there. It was a pageant. It was a lot of work, and just so happens a cousin that I didn't know was there and told everybody that they saw me and my brother. Okay, I'm just now coming out. Now I'm doing this drag show, and so then it was, do you want to be a girl? And all these things that they weren't ready to have the conversations and understanding of. And this is back in the 90s when we didn't have the conversation to have the conversation. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Like, we have a much better conversation on gender and sexuality and how they're not together, they're not linked,
Yeah.
that we didn't have back then. So for about 3 months, my mom disowned me. At this time, my parents were divorced. It was a big mess, anyways. So I wasn't talking to dad so much. And we healed from that. And it took something. And then my grandmother, fast forward like 4 years, 3 years, and my grandmother bought me the whole set of How to Pray the Gay Away. And we're talking the videos, the audios, the books. That was my Christmas present that year.
Wow.
And that was a moment like opening up this big box. I just bought for my grandmother, I had bought a big, huge bedroom set. We, this whole nice thing. She was living with me at the moment, and I got this big box that was expected to be from the freaking uh, thrift store, honestly, and it was the whole set, about $1,500 worth of materials,
Wow.
and that was the moment my mom and our relationship kind of mended, like changed in that moment because she saw that. I don't know what happened to that box. It was not there when I got back home. I've never seen that box again.
Good.
But that moment was what changed things. And I say this because you're still very young. And I believe that there's hope. You don't know what that moment's going to be, but there's hope.
For sure. Yeah.
And it's rough. And it wasn't always sunshines, rainbows either.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for me, I'm in my 30s, so I'm not. It's been a long time since I was a teenager, and it's not that I've written off any chance of other people changing, but I think it's just that my life isn't about that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if people change, then it's brilliant. It's a bonus. But actually, my sense of self-worth and safety and all of those things can't hang on what other people think.
Very
You
true.
know, we need that belonging and we need the right people. But I think to have an attachment to, I need this individual to accept me exactly the way that I want them to, and that's a hard thing. And actually, I think you can drive yourself mad hanging on to that. Um, not to say that the people you're waiting to catch up or are in the right, or that they're being, that they're not being unkind or something, but I think I think it's an advantage of having worked through your trauma, is that you can hold space for the possibilities. And it's not to say that I wouldn't close the door on a relationship if that felt like the right thing to do, but I feel much more able, and I think I see this a lot with my clients, that once they've started to really work through their complex trauma, they find it easier. Obviously, it's still not like great, but a lot easier to sit with the unknown, sit with the possibilities of what might happen, and kind of let things be long term. Because I think when you're living with a very traumatized brain, it's very geared towards all or nothing. Like this person is either for me or against me, and in a way you could probably argue that that is the case. But I think the difference is that when you feel better, you're not so traumatized anymore, it's easier to sit with the, well, I'm not at a place where I want to cut this person out at the moment or break contact for now. And at the same time, I recognize that they're kind of not talking to me respectfully, or they still have some unusual ideas about people like me, or, so I think sitting in the grey area is more difficult, but actually from a nervous system point of view, it's more peaceful than actually the all or nothing, fight or flight, join me or get out kind of thing. It feels less violent in a way, like in your body.
Yeah, definitely. And here in the States, we're very divided. My family itself is very divided, um, because of the Trump mega thing.
Mm.
So, and I'm assuming you're not in the States by your accent. So I,
No.
you know, just assumptions. And I didn't ask. Where are you from?
I'm in England.
Oh,
I'm in the south of England.
beautiful. What's the best part about being there?
Um, it's a hard one. I mean, on the one hand, if you're into history, we've got quite a lot of that. The church that I'm not religious, but the church that I grew up going to, the oldest part of that church is about 1,000 years old. So there's lots of like history around, and that's quite nice. But also, I guess if you grow up with it, that's what you're used to seeing. Um, and in terms of like society, I mean, we've got also a big rise of a lot of right wing, very very fascist ideologies going on here at the moment as well, and it's also affecting trans healthcare. That's been pretty tough. But generally, I think as a nation over the years, it feels like, not all the time, but a lot of the time, people tend, a lot of the ones I meet anyway, tend towards this very kind of laissez-faire. Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? And this attitude of like, well, it's not hurting anyone. And obviously, there's plenty of people who don't fit that type, and marginalized folks in the UK still suffer very very real consequences of bigotry and hatred, and all that kind of thing. But I feel like, depending on where you live and the circle that you keep, you can have a fairly good kind of social life, I suppose. And like I went to secondary school, and here where I live, secondary school is from the ages of 11 to 18. And our school, the first like semester or term, we call it, the first term that we were there, you got taken around all the local places of worship of all the different religions. It was, and there was absolutely still racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and all that sort of thing at our school. But on the whole, there was this sense of like, actually, the school agrees with me if I'm going to open my mouth and tell people and advocate for, minorities and stuff. Actually, I feel I've been given permission to do that because the school agrees. So yeah, but it's very mixed. It's very mixed, and at the same time, whilst there is a lot of diversity and attitudes of sort of, you know, people trying to, you know, broadly respect everyone who's different, you know, our nation is one of the kind of oldest sort of governments in the West. Well, I don't know. My historical and political understandings are not the best in the world. My brother went to university to do read ancient history, so this is his thing. But I just see that it's such an odd thing, because you're often, even within sort of hierarchical structures of like corporate entities and stuff, you'll see they've got like a diversity, equity and inclusion department, or advocates, and you know, they really do believe in it, but they don't understand that even the structure of their business is antithetical to inclusion, diversity and equity. So it's a really interesting mixed bag, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, things that are at the top doesn't always filter all the way through in
No.
corporations. So they could say one thing, but in policy, like in thought, but even you know, faced against somebody that was right wing, you have your own preconceived notions and you have your own preconceived everything that you have to let go of to be, you know, because diversity would include them too. And that's what's really hard for people like us, like me, to understand, is that they have the right to exist too.
Yeah.
As much as we disagree with them, as much as we believe that their um, thinking is very divisive,
Yeah, and I think,
toxic.
yeah, and yeah, I agree with you. I think that trying to enforce a lot of this stuff is on the one hand, it may keep minorities safe in a sense, but also it will grow resentment, because those people haven't come to that attitude willingly.
Mhm.
And it's such a, you know, I'm aware of that. And I also, you know, it's such a complex thing, because also I think there are people out there who actually, they're not interested in the first place, and they never will be, in terms of coming together on an issue. They're like, this is what I think, and actually I don't care to change my mind, and I guess that is their right too. But
And
then it's like, well, where do you go with that? You know, it's like, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, you know, freedom of speech surely means that I can say whatever I want. And it's like, freedom of speech doesn't mean without consequences. It just means you can say what you want. But
exactly.
also, you know, it's like, you know, if you run a social media platform and you've got someone on there saying like, oh, we should do away with all of the people in this group, or they're ridiculous, or they don't exist, or they're perverts, or whatever, you know, whatever
Hmm.
madness they're saying. And I think you as a platform owner also have the right to deplatform them and not allow them to use your platform. So yeah, it's a mixture. But then, you know, I've heard other people, I've had black friends of mine say that, you know, at least in the US, if someone's being racist, they're doing it to your face, whereas in England it might not happen so much, but when it does happen, some of those times it's really passive aggressive, or it's said like really sarcastically, and they only get it like days later. So you know, I don't know if there's a perfect system, but I do.
I don't know
It's
if
a tricky.
I don't know if there is the ability to have a perfect system, because again, we're gonna have our own preconceived notions, right? I have biases. I know I have biases. If I see a red MAGA hat, my first, like, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me. I look at it and I'm like, you're a freaking idiot. And I have very close people to me, like extremely close, that we've had to come to terms with the fact that we very highly disagree.
Mm.
very, very highly disagree, and had to like deal with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I can have this conversation is because I've had to have those conversations,
Yeah.
which is helpful and healthy, right? So I can almost see when someone is calling me a faggot and just being like ridiculous about it. It doesn't happen very often anymore, thank goodness, but it does happen, and I can just okay, as long as you're not being violent to me, that's your view. Thank you. I see you. You have the right to your view. As long as you're letting me live, have a nice day. When you get in my face, when you're making my life difficult, there's another conversation.
Mm.
And I think that's the free speech thing, right? You have a right to say whatever you want up to a certain spot until it starts to really affecting someone else's life. Like someone walking by and saying faggot isn't gonna bother me. I might go like this for a second, like thanks. Or someone, more often than not, it's like blow me faggot. You know, pull it out.
Interesting choice of words there.
You know, like okay, I, here, you know,
At least buy me a drink first.
exactly. They're never the cute ones.
No.
It's never the porn stars. It's never the porn stars. It's like they were spurned, like they're spurned lovers. But there comes a point where if it's in my face, I was staying with some people when I first got into an RV, and they were very heavy Trump fans, family friends all my life. Like she's a second mother, and she threatened to kick me out over it because I was like, I'm not voting for Trump. It's not happening. It's against my just whole code. Now, I hate Joe just as much, right? I think he needs to go retire peacefully. He's done his service. He's beautiful. He's not bad. He's just, it's time for him to go. They shouldn't have pulled him out the balls in the first place. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough conversation to have, and I have to say, I can have these conversations much better since trauma therapy. It's still not my favorite. I'm never, some people, they can't wait to have these political conversations, and I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure. Like, I'm not in the mood to find out, the true colors of some of these people right now, because they come out with all kinds of, But on the occasions it does happen, I think if I can trust that the other person is having that conversation in good faith and because they're genuinely curious, and I'm genuinely curious about what they think, and we can really come at it from a real good faith point of view, and we really care about each other as human beings, then those conversations have started to happen. But pre trauma treatment, I couldn't have done that. I'd have been like, I literally, I can't have this conversation. I'd have just left the room. It would have just been too hard. And I think that's why, a lot of the kind of loudest or most vocal folks, particularly, coming from a marginalized space online, gets such a bad rap because they're seen as hysterical, or often are accused of being triggered, and maybe they are, but I think that's kind of missing the point.
Why are they triggered?
Yeah, exactly. But it, I think if you're possibly coming from a background where emotions are weak and empathy is seen as a sort of quite an irrelevant trait and not necessary for human connection, and even human connection isn't hugely, it's not the center of somebody's world, then I think that can be a really difficult conversation to have.
Definitely. Definitely. I think as growing up male, you're taught it doesn't matter. You don't feel. You don't connect. Find a wife, connect with her,
Mm.
take care of your kids. But it doesn't matter how you actually feel. Gotta
Yeah.
go to work, provide for the family, go hunting. You know, and we're learning how toxic that mentality is, and how many men just kill themselves because they can't feel.
Yeah.
They're not allowed. Walk it off. So I
Yeah, it's so interesting because, I mean, obviously from my work, what we learn is that actually the quickest way to resolve a feeling is to sit with it, listen to it, be friends with it, all of that stuff. Like, one of the first parts of the work that I do with people is around emotional integration or reintegration. And it's so, when once people get the hang of it, that's when they become the sort of stable, thoughtful, concise, um, well-reasoned, articulate, calm person. That's where that happens. And if you've had a very traumatized background, then that's going to be very difficult to access. And it's almost like you almost get written off by certain characters from trying to engage in those conversations, because you can't be like rational, logical, all of those things that you're so kind of silenced for being in the first place. And that actually the issue with those people who are perceived as hysterical, their issue isn't that they've sucked it up. The issue is that they've done that too much.
exactly.
We can't, as human beings, stop feeling. And actually, if we try to suppress the humanity out of people, in my experience, that's where we end up with, like high suicide rates in men, personality disorders. Obviously, there are some disorders that are totally organic and you're just going to get them, unfortunately. But a lot of the time, really good example. I was talking to the attachment nerd. I think it was earlier this year or last year. She's social. She does a lot of sort of social influencing type stuff, but she's also a therapist and specializes in attachment. And we were saying that our experience is that if you've got disorganized attachment, which is where the way that your parents were with you from birth, or maybe you grew up in a home or whatever, if you have disorganized attachment because your caregivers were unreliable, often unsafe themselves, not emotionally available, not necessarily very nurturing, that's where you get the sort of most likely to get the sort of developmental personality disorders. So we can see that having this attitude of suck it up, don't talk about it, it's so destructive. It is so destructive. And I think it seems to be revolutionary in the work that I'm doing when I'm speaking to people one-to-one, of just saying to them, they're like, oh, I'm having this feeling. What should I do with it? And I'm like, feel it first. What's it trying to tell you? And this idea that you don't suppress your emotions, but you get to know them, you get to know what they're trying to tell you. That's where the healing begins and people become more stable. It's the opposite of sucking it up. It's the opposite of pushing it down. And it is the art of, even when I started hearing about this stuff, I was like, oh, it just sounds a bit wet. Do you know what I mean? Like a bit, like soggy bread. I was like, oh, this is like really gross. I didn't like it. And sorry for those of you who are not English or British, saying wet is like, like wet behind the ears, like you're a bit like weak, like a bit weak, a bit cringy, a bit gross. So I get it. I didn't grow up with any of that. It was, if I was crying as a kid, it was like, is anything broken or bleeding? No. Well, you'll be all right then. Go away. That was it.
Definitely. I think
And
I've actually
now,
heard that.
yeah, exactly. And now I watch, like, people, my generation and with their small kids. And I understand the theory of it, but I'm not a parent. So I've watched, sort of like some people close to me are raising this little, like, kid who's now 4. And if there's been like an injury, someone's fallen over, then it's a real sitting with the kid and being like, oh, it really hurts. It's horrible when you fall over. And it just, all of this empathy's going on. And I'm like, there's part of me that was quite uncomfortable at first watching it. I didn't say anything. I was like, I understand, like, theoretically that they're doing the right thing, but to witness that as someone who didn't get that as a child, I was like, this is weird. But the amazing part was that within 5 minutes, it was done.
Mhm.
That was it. There was no more tantrums. There was no more anything. The feeling was sat with, worked through, and then it was done. And then the rest of the day carried on. It was just not a big deal.
Yeah,
It is really magical.
can be. It definitely.
Mhm.
And it is wet. It is soggy bread. It sucks.
Yeah.
I got it. I, I have done so much healing this summer. Heather is actually watching, and she can tell you she's the first person I talk to about things. And so much of having to just be there, feel it, deal with it, acknowledge it, love it. Okay, you know, just let it go until I can't let it go. Then you have to have the conversation, and then that's a whole nother mess. But just healing and just being that.
Mm,
And I love that you're doing this work with people.
thank you.
Love that you're doing this work with people. It's not easy.
So rewarding though. And I think not only, do I hope that people become hopeful, but also to realize that actually once you're ready, and being ready can take years. There's no, it's not competition. But once you're ready to sort through this stuff, it's intense, but it doesn't last that long. I work with people for 3 months. That's it. Once a week, 3 months, done.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not, it's not to say that you leave that perfect, and also you can have new trauma. I discovered that I had a near car accident a year ago.
Ooh,
Um, which was, yeah, I've been working through that. That's been really interesting. But 90% of the way there. But yeah, that's been really interesting. But yeah, I mean, this kind of work, people say, oh, it must have taken so much for you to get over your trauma and to be dysfunctional. I was like, it's not as long as you think. I've talked. I won't bore you with the details. If people want to hear my story, I've got more on my website. But my simple PTSD was treated in 2 hours, and my complex PTSD was treated in a matter of months. Thank you. So it was really quick. I think once you learn how it works, you're like, oh, this is a really simple idea.
yeah.
And it's over really quickly. There's a lot of tissues involved. Like, you definitely will cry through a lot of it. But it's not triggering. It's not horrible or unpleasant. It's just a big release, and it's a relief as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, Harris, what's one thing you would like to leave with people?
Um, the one thing I think that I really want people to understand the difference between that trauma therapy is not necessarily the same thing as trauma processing. And I know this is technical and it's maybe not very sexy, but the difference is really important, because I've met people, and I was one of these people who was in the loop for years talking about what I'd gone through. But I didn't get anywhere. I just got really practiced at telling my story of why I was so traumatized. And then I came across someone who could actually treat trauma, and it was over so quickly. And I was like, oh, I can't believe that I've been left to struggle with this for so many years when it was over so quickly. And I've never had a flashback, a relapse, nothing, never been triggered ever again. Like, it's gone. And I want people to just understand there's no right or wrong answer. If you're at a point in your journey where you do need to talk about it, you do need to have that, your story witnessed by somebody else. It's totally valid. But I think once you're at a point where you're like, I'm so done, I just don't want to be traumatized anymore. Trauma processing is a specific thing that you're doing for your brain and your body that's not the same as talking therapies. And knowing that difference can save a life. And I really believe that.
So make sure you check out Harris's website. It's MX Harris, HARRIS, Hill, HILL.com. And Harris, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate you.
It's been such a pleasure.
If you are going through trauma, make sure that you check them out. Just amazing work. Thank you.
Thank
you. All right, folks. Thank you for watching the Creative Nomad Show. I will see you all next week. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you for watching the Creative Nomad Show. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, check out creativenomadshow.com. There is also a link at the bottom if you are an awesome creator and would like to be a guest. Know that you are loved.
Everyone here at the True Awesome Network asks you to please subscribe, like, comment, and spread awesome.